I am continuing my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am reading in a chronological order of events, not according to publication or volume, so I will be skipping around a bit as I move along. So now we turn back again to chapter 17 of Alma, returning to the story of the sons of Mosiah and their missionary journey, because they left in the first year of the reign of the judges. And while the first chapter of Alma, we read that the story of Nehor and his execution for murdering Gideon, and the rise of priestcrafts among the people and the contentions, all of that takes place within the first 5 years. Now Nehor, he was in the first year. The rest of that description was in the first 5 years. We're now going to finish out, or we're going to read the first 5 years approximately of the sons of Mosiah. Now Nehor, he was in the first year of the reign of the judges, but the contentions and the spreading of priestcrafts and all that, that's described happening over the course of the first 4 years of the reign of the judges. All this time, the sons of Mosiah are down preaching to the Lamanites. Now we read the first part of chapter 17, which is the story of them leaving Zarahemla, going down to the land of the Lamanites. They divide, they separate out, and Ammon starts to serve King Lamoni in the land of Ishmael. That's where we left off with the sons of Mosiah. Now we're going to keep reading in the sons of Mosiah's story until we get to approximately the 5th year of the reign of the judges. We pick this up here in chapter 17. We've already read the verses 5 through 25. Now we're going to pick this up in verse 26. And after he had been in the service of the king 3 days, as he was with the Lamanitish servants going forth with their flocks to the place of water, which was called the waters of Sebus, and all the Lamanites drive their flocks hither, that they may have water. Therefore, as Ammon and the servants of the king were driving forth their flocks to this place of water, behold, a certain number of the Lamanites, who had been with their flocks to water, stood and scattered the flocks of Ammon and the servants of the king. And they scattered them insomuch that they fled many ways. Now the servants of the king began to murmur, saying, Now the king will slay us, as he has our brethren, because their flocks were scattered by the wickedness of these men. And they began to weep exceedingly, saying, Behold, our flocks are scattered already. Now they wept because of the fear of being slain. Now when Ammon saw this, his heart was swollen within him with joy. For, said he, I will show forth my power unto these my fellow servants, or the power which is in me in restoring these flocks unto the king, that I may win the hearts of these my fellow servants, that I may lead them to believe in my words. And now these were the thoughts of Ammon when he saw the afflictions of those whom he termed to be his brethren. And it came to pass that he flattered them with his words, saying, My brethren, be of good cheer, and let us go in search of the flocks, and we will gather them together, and bring them back unto the place of water. And thus we will preserve the flocks unto the king, and he will not slay us. And it came to pass that they went in search of the flocks, and they did follow Ammon, and they rushed forth with much swiftness, and did head the flocks of the king, and did gather them together again to the place of water. And those men again stood to scatter their flocks. But Ammon said unto his brethren, Encircle the flocks round about, that they flee not, and I go and contend with these men who do scatter our flocks. Therefore they did as Ammon commanded them, and he went forth and stood to contend with those who stood by the waters of Sebus, and they were in the number not a few. Therefore they did not fear Ammon, for they supposed that one of their men could slay him according to their pleasure. For they knew not that the Lord had promised Mosiah that he would deliver his sons out of their hands. Neither did they know anything concerning the Lord. Therefore they delighted in the destruction of their brethren, and for this cause they stood to scatter the flocks of the king. But Ammon stood forth, and began to cast stones at them with his sling. Yea, with mighty power he did sling stones against them. And thus he slew a certain number of them, insomuch that they began to be astonished at his power. Nevertheless they were angry because of the slaying of their brethren, and they were determined that he should fall. Therefore, seeing that they could not hit him with their stones, they came forth with clubs to slay him. But behold, every man that lifted his club to smite Ammon, he smote off their arms with his sword. For he did withstand their blows by smiting their arms with the edge of his sword, insomuch that they began to be astonished, and began to flee before him. Yea, and they were not few in number, and he caused them to flee by the strength of his arm. Now 6 of them had fallen by the sling, but he slew none, save it were their leader with his sword. And he smote off as many of their arms as were lifted against him, and they were not a few. And when he had driven them afar off, he returned, and they watered their flocks, and returned them to the pasture of the king. and then went in unto the king, bearing the arms which had been smitten off by the sword of Ammon, of those who sought to slay him. And they were carried in unto the king for a testimony of the things which they had done. Not much to say in this chapter, because we all know the story. This is one of the most famous stories in the Book of Mormon. It is interesting that he records the exact number that were killed by the slain. But I find it more interesting that up to this point, it doesn't seem like Ammon actually had any intention of preaching directly to the king, at least not yet. He seems to be saying, no, he became a servant and he can preach to the servants. He's putting himself in a position where he can preach, where he can set himself as an example to the servants and get them to believe in him, and then he can work his way up to the king. It seems to me that his intention is not to go among the royalty first. I find that interesting. But as I say, we won't say too much about this. But we will pick it up in chapter 18, so I will see you there.